The house was empty when I walked in. I mean, unusually empty, the kind of quiet that makes the hairs on your neck stand up. I could feel it immediately, something was off. I'd just come back from a business trip, expecting Sarah to be home. Instead, I walked into a silence that felt staged, like she'd gone out of her way to remove any trace of life from the place. At first, I figured maybe she just stepped out, or was in the shower, or maybe even napping upstairs. But then I noticed it. A wine glass, a half-empty bottle of Pinot Noir on the kitchen counter. Beside it, a single set of keys, a keyring I didn't recognize. I picked them up, holding them under the kitchen light, turning them over slowly in my hand. I was sure they weren't mine, and they definitely weren't Sarah's. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at that half-full glass of wine, wondering what the hell was going on. My gut twisted in a way that was all too familiar, a low, nauseating pull that told me something was wrong, even if my brain couldn't quite catch up yet. Then I heard a sound, faint but unmistakable, a shuffling coming from upstairs, and then the creak of floorboards. I stood frozen, just staring at the staircase. My heartbeat thudded in my ears as I realized I wasn't alone in my own house. My mind raced through possibilities, each one darker than the last. I'm no stranger to working late or Sarah having to go out on the weekends, but this? This didn't feel like a late-night meeting or an errand run. I took a slow breath and moved toward the stairs, stepping lightly, each sound sharper in the silence. Halfway up, I noticed a men's jacket tossed over the banister. It was leather, expensive-looking, and definitely not mine. I lifted it by one sleeve, and the scent of cologne hit me hard, one I didn't recognize. I dropped it like it was diseased and kept climbing, my hands cold as I gripped the railing. At the top of the stairs, the sound became clearer, a low murmur of voices coming from behind our bedroom door. I paused, listening. I heard a muffled laugh, hers, and a man's voice saying something too low for me to catch. I could feel the air get heavy, like I was suddenly underwater. Every instinct screamed at me to kick down the door, but some part of me was holding back, still desperate to believe this wasn't happening. Finally, I pressed my hand to the door, pushing it open a few inches until I could see inside. There they were, on my bed. I was so stunned I couldn't move, couldn't think. Sarah was lying across the bed, propped up on one elbow, her bare legs tangled with his. And him? Some guy with his shirt unbuttoned, laughing with her as if he belonged there, as if he was entitled to my place, my life, my wife. A surge of rage shot through me, white-hot, and I threw the door open. They shot up, scrambling, the guy grabbing his shirt, Sarah yanking a blanket around herself. The look on her face was one I'd never seen before, sheer terror. She stammered, "Ben. I didn't think. Didn't think I'd come home early? Didn't think I'd see this?" My voice was so calm it scared me. I wasn't shouting or raging. I was just staring at them, dead inside. The guy, probably figuring he'd be safer out of arm's reach, mumbled something about leaving and bolted past me, barefoot and shirt in hand. I let him go. I didn't even watch him stumble down the stairs. He wasn't my concern. Sarah was. The woman I trusted with my life, who was now sitting in our bed, staring back at me with wide, guilty eyes. I didn't move, didn't say a word. She finally broke the silence. "Ben. I can explain." "Go ahead," I said, my voice low and cold. "I'd love to hear you try." "Ben, please, it's not what you think. It just happened, okay? We were working late on a project, one thing led to another, and..." "One thing led to another?" I repeated, disgusted. "That's your explanation? You accidentally ended up in bed with some guy?" Her face crumpled, and for a second, I almost believed she was sorry. Almost. But I'd seen the way she was lying there, comfortable, like it was just another night. "Ben, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I don't know what came over me. I love you. I swear." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Love me? You love me, so you bring some guy into our house? Our bedroom?" Her eyes darted around, like she was looking for some way out, some excuse that would make it all go away. But there was nothing she could say to erase the fact that she'd betrayed me in the worst possible way. "Who is he?" I demanded. "How long has this been going on?" She swallowed hard, glancing down. It's not what you think. It was just, once." "Once?" "Don't insult my intelligence, Sarah. You don't just accidentally end up in bed with someone in our home." "Who is he?" She shifted uncomfortably, looking anywhere but at me. He's from work. His name's Paul. We've just been working together for a while." I swear, Ben, it didn't mean anything. "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "Do you hear yourself? It didn't mean anything, but you were willing to risk our marriage for him?" She tried to reach out, but I pulled back. "Ben, please. It's over. I'll never see him again. I'll do anything, just, please don't leave me." I couldn't look at her. I felt sick, betrayed, humiliated. Part of me wanted to throw her out right then, to tell her to pack her things and leave. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I'd married, held back. I walked to the window, my back to her. I needed a moment to think, to process. But the anger inside me was too strong. I turned back, fixing her with a look that I hoped showed just a fraction of the hurt she'd caused me. "You know what, Sarah?" I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't think I even know you anymore. How long were you planning to keep this up? Until I found out? Or were you going to let me keep playing the fool?" Tears streamed down her face. "No, Ben, it wasn't like that. I don't know what happened. I've been feeling disconnected. Like we were drifting apart. I thought maybe." "Disconnected? So that's it? You feel disconnected, and instead of talking to me, you decide to sleep with someone else? Do you have any idea what you've done?" She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, and I'm so sorry. I'll do anything to make it right." I laughed again, a harsh, bitter sound that had nothing to do with humor. "Anything? Like what? Erase my memory? Pretend it never happened? What am I supposed to do with this, Sarah? You can't just say you're sorry and expect me to forget that I walked in on my wife with another man." She looked up at me, desperate. "Please, Ben. Don't throw everything away. We can work through this. I'll go to counseling, I'll quit my job, whatever you need, I'll do it." I took a deep breath, letting the silence hang between us for a long moment. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, they were all there, boiling inside me. But beneath it all was a numbness, a cold, hollow feeling that told me there was no going back. "You want to know what I need?" I asked quietly. "I need to know who you really are. Because the woman I thought I married would never do this." She looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading. But there was nothing she could say that would make any of this right. I stood there, staring at her, feeling nothing but a mix of anger and numbness. It's strange, the way betrayal feels. I'd always assumed I'd know what to do in this situation. That if my wife ever crossed that line, I'd throw her out, end things, never look back. But reality has a way of tearing up even your best ideas. I was stuck, paralyzed, not knowing what to feel, let alone what to do next. Sarah stayed there on the edge of the bed, wrapped in the blanket she'd pulled around herself like a shield. She looked broken. Good, I thought. She should be. She had done this to us, turned our marriage into a joke. And yet she was sitting there, looking like she wanted me to comfort her, as if I were the one who needed to make this easier for her. The absurdity of it all nearly made me laugh, but there was nothing funny about any of this. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I finally said, my voice so low I barely recognized it. "All this time, all these years, I thought I knew you, thought I knew what we had." She started to say something, but I cut her off. "No, you don't get to talk yet. You've had enough time to make your choices, haven't you? It's my turn now." She swallowed, clutching the blanket tighter. Ben, please. I know I made a mistake. I know I hurt you, but I'll do anything. I swear to you, I'll do whatever it takes. I stared at her, trying to make sense of the words. She was acting as if this were just a rough patch, some small issue we could solve by making a few adjustments. But the problem was simple. She had taken a knife to our marriage, cut it right in half, and expected me to just glue it back together. How could she be so clueless? Or maybe she was just that selfish. Either way, I didn't care. I had no interest in fixing anything, not with her. Do you think I'm an idiot, Sarah? I said, watching her flinch at the hardness in my voice. Did you think you could keep this hidden forever? Did you even care if you got caught? She shook her head, looking like a frightened child. No, it wasn't like that. I wasn't thinking, Ben. It just happened. It just happened? I repeated, my voice a snarl. That's the best you can do? You want me to believe you didn't make a choice, that you somehow ended up in bed with another man without realizing it? Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked down. I know it sounds bad, but I didn't mean for this to happen. I love you, Ben. I never stopped loving you. You love me? I laughed bitterly. Is that what you call love? Lying, sneaking around, bringing some guy into our bed? That's love? She reached out a hand, but I took a step back, and she let it fall. Please, Ben, you don't understand. Things haven't been easy for us. We've been distant, you've been so focused on work, and I didn't feel like you wanted me anymore. I let her words sink in, my anger simmering just under the surface. It was classic deflection, an attempt to blame me for her choices. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done, she was sorry she'd been caught. That much was painfully clear. So this is my fault, is that it? I asked, my voice cold. I drove you to this? No, I didn't mean it that way, she stammered, her face pale. I don't know. I felt lost, like I wasn't enough for you anymore. I shook my head, disgusted. You weren't enough for me? So, what, you found someone who made you feel better? That's your excuse? You felt insecure, so you decided to sleep with someone else? She covered her face, sobbing into her hands. I watched her for a moment, feeling nothing but a strange sense of detachment. I wasn't moved by her tears, wasn't touched by her regret. She was nothing more than a stranger to me now, someone I used to know. I turned away, pacing to the window. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows across the lawn, illuminating the quiet, empty street. It felt surreal, standing here in the darkness, my whole life shattered around me. I didn't know what I was supposed to do next. Leave? Throw her out? Call a lawyer? Every option felt hollow, meaningless. She spoke up again, her voice a broken whisper. Ben, please. I don't want to lose you. I know I messed up, but can we try to fix this? I looked back at her, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and disbelief. Fix this? Sarah, you destroyed us. You made a choice, one that you can't take back. There's nothing left to fix. She shook her head, her face streaked with tears. But we have a life together. We've built so much. Are you really willing to throw it all away over one mistake? One mistake? I snapped, my voice rising. You call this one mistake? How many times, Sarah? How many nights did you spend with him while I was at work, while I was here, trusting you, loving you? She hesitated, her eyes darting away. That pause was all I needed to know that this wasn't a one-time thing. It had been going on for a while, maybe months, maybe longer. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She hadn't just betrayed me once, she'd been lying to me for who knows how long. I took a step back, shaking my head. You know what? I don't want to hear any more of your excuses. I don't care why you did it, or how many times. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. She looked up at me, her face pale and tear-streaked. Ben, please, can't we at least talk about this? I can change. I can be better. I don't want to lose you. I felt a surge of anger rise up, the betrayal burning through me like acid. It's too late, Sarah. You already lost me the moment you decided to betray me. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. She just sat there, her face crumpling as the reality of the situation hit her. For a long moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. I could see the regret in her eyes, the panic, the desperation. But it was too late. There was no going back from this. I stepped away from her, needing distance. I couldn't stand her being there, wrapped up in that blanket, looking pathetic and scared. Part of me thought, good. Let her be scared. It wasn't nearly enough to balance out the pain tearing through me, but it was something. I went downstairs, leaving her to her regrets and excuses. In the kitchen, I tried to ground myself, to remember where I was and what I had to do next. But each thought just led me back to the fact that my wife, the woman I trusted with everything, had betrayed me. I glanced around the room, at the wineglass still sitting on the counter, at that stranger's keys lying next to it. Just seeing those things, reminders of what had happened in my own home, made my stomach churn. I picked up the wineglass and smashed it in the sink, watching as it shattered into pieces. It felt good, small, but good. I grabbed his keys, walked out to the front yard, and threw them as hard as I could into the bushes by the curb. Let him dig around for them. I was done cleaning up after anyone tonight. It was almost midnight, and I knew I wouldn't be getting any sleep, but I couldn't stay here. I couldn't be in the same house as her right now. I headed back upstairs to grab my jacket and keys, planning to just get in the car and drive. But when I got to the bedroom, she was still sitting there, staring into nothing like she'd turned to stone. For the briefest second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But the image of her wrapped up with that guy on our bed, laughing with him, killed any flicker of sympathy. I grabbed my jacket from the closet, and she looked up, eyes red, face hollow. Ben, please, where are you going? Can we talk about this? I gave her a look that must have said enough because she immediately shut her mouth, folding back into herself. I didn't answer her. Talking wasn't going to fix anything. I didn't even know if I'd be able to talk to her without losing it, so I turned and left, pulling the door closed behind me. I walked out to the driveway, got in the car, and started driving with no destination in mind. Just getting away was enough for now. I headed out of the neighborhood, past the streets I knew like the back of my hand. I drove in silence, no music, no distractions. Just the road and the rage that felt like it was ripping through my chest. After a few minutes, I realized I'd driven over to the edge of town, right near the overlook where we used to go when we were first dating. I hadn't been here in years. The place was usually packed with teenagers on weekends, but tonight it was empty. Perfect. I parked the car and got out, leaning against the hood and looking out over the town. In the quiet, everything from the past few hours came rushing back, all of it hitting me at once. I felt this overwhelming wave of betrayal, but also confusion, and something I hated admitting, embarrassment. I had been blindsided, made to look like a fool in my own home, while everyone else probably saw this coming. How many times had I ignored those gut feelings when she stayed late, when she was glued to her phone, or when she brushed me off with some excuse? I had trusted her, and she had taken advantage of it, taken advantage of me. I thought of all those little details that hadn't added up but that I had brushed off. The times she'd stayed at the office late, claiming deadlines or extra projects, the times she'd barely looked up from her phone as she mumbled a vague excuse. I'd given her the benefit of the doubt every time. Every single time. And she'd known that. She'd known I would never suspect her. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and dialed the first person who came to mind, my brother, Dave. He picked up on the third ring, sounding groggy. Ben? What's going on, man? Hearing his voice almost broke me. I'd held it together up to this point, kept it all bottled in, but hearing someone I could trust, someone I knew cared about me, made it all real. Dave, I started, but I didn't know where to go from there. I felt like an idiot, standing there in the middle of the night, unable to even say it. Ben? You okay? You sound off. I took a shaky breath. She cheated on me, Dave. The words came out like they were choking me, but they were out. I walked in on her tonight. Right in our own bedroom. With some guy. There was a long pause, and for a second, I thought maybe the line had gone dead. Then he spoke, voice calm but hard. Ben, are you serious? You sure? Yeah, I'm sure, I said, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles ached. I saw them. I didn't just find out or hear a rumor. I walked in on them. He let out a low whistle, and I could hear him shifting, probably sitting up now. Jesus, Ben. I don't even know what to say. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I didn't know what I wanted him to say either. I just needed to get it out, to hear someone else acknowledge what had happened so it wouldn't feel like some horrible dream. What do you want to do? He asked. Do you want me to come over? Do you need to crash here? I considered it, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. I didn't want to sit in someone else's house, wallowing. And the thought of lying on a couch, knowing my wife had just been with another man in our bed, made me feel sick. No, I'm just driving right now, I said. Needed to clear my head. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. He was quiet for a moment, then asked, Are you planning to go back? Or, are you done? That question hung heavy in the air. Was I done? In that moment, it felt like I'd never be able to look at her again, never be able to forgive her. But the life we'd built together, the years of memories, it wasn't easy to just let it go. Even after what I'd seen. I don't know, I admitted. I don't know what the hell I'm supposed to do. Well, whatever you decide, you know I've got your back, he said firmly. You need a place to stay, need anything, just call me. I thanked him, ending the call and putting my phone back in my pocket. I leaned against the car, staring out over the city, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. I was stuck. Stuck between the life I thought I had and the brutal reality I was staring down now. After a while, I climbed back into the car and drove aimlessly, letting the quiet settle over me. By the time I got back to the house, the sky was lightening just slightly, dawn still an hour or two away. I parked in the driveway and sat there, staring at the house that no longer felt like mine. I didn't want to go back inside, didn't want to face her again, but I had to. There was no avoiding it. When I walked back in, she was sitting on the couch in the living room, wide-eyed and hollow. She'd been crying. I could tell from the streaks on her face, the redness in her eyes. She looked up as I closed the door, but she didn't speak. I sat down across from her, waiting for her to say something, anything that would make sense of this mess. Finally, she broke the silence. Ben, I know. I know there's nothing I can say to make this right. I can't undo what happened. But I need you to know. I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. I laughed, shaking my head. Fix it? You think we can fix this? Sarah, you killed everything. There's no coming back from this. She reached out, her hand trembling. Please, Ben, can't we at least try? I stared at her hand, then looked back up at her face. There was nothing there for me anymore, nothing that even resembled the woman I'd thought I loved. She'd made her choice, and now I had to make mine. I looked at her, the way she sat there, hollow and lost, clutching at whatever was left between us, like a drowning person holding on to anything that floats. But for me, it was already over. She had burned it all down, and there was no resurrecting it. I didn't know what I wanted to say, but I knew I couldn't stay here, hashing out details, listening to promises she had no right to make. I leaned back, trying to process what she just asked me. So, what? You think if you apologize enough, if you cry enough, if you say the right things, then we just go back to how it was? She shook her head, her face crumpling again. No, Ben, I don't expect you to forget what I did. I don't want us to end like this. I want a chance to make it right. Make it right? I repeated, staring at her. You can't make it right, Sarah. You can't undo what you did. You invited another man into our bed, into our home. That's it. That's all there is. She tried to reach across the coffee table, as if to grab my hand, but I moved my arm back, a reflex I couldn't control. Her hand hovered there for a second, then she pulled it back, wrapping her arms around herself. It was like she was realizing, maybe for the first time, that she couldn't undo what she'd done, that some things just couldn't be fixed. I was stupid, she whispered. I didn't think. I didn't. I wasn't thinking about what it would cost. I just sat there, numb, my voice cold. Cost? You didn't think it would cost? How do you think it feels for me, sitting here, looking at you and knowing you lied to my face over and over? You think that's something I can just get over? She swallowed hard, her eyes full of tears again, but this time she didn't look away. No, I know. I know I can't take it back. I know what I did to you. I know how much I've hurt you. I shook my head, feeling the anger bubbling up again. No, I don't think you do, Sarah. Because if you did, you wouldn't be sitting here asking me to work things out. You would understand that you destroyed everything. The words hung there, heavy, final. I could see the realization settle in her eyes, like she was finally starting to understand just how deep her betrayal went. And for the first time, I saw something besides regret in her expression, something that almost looked like shame. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. Ben, I can't lose you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't lose you. I sighed, pressing my fingers into my temples. I was exhausted, and I hadn't even begun to process what all of this would mean, what the next steps would be. Part of me wanted to walk out the door and never look back. The other part, the part that still remembered all the good times, that still saw her as my wife, wanted to sit down and figure out if maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. But then I thought of that night, coming home, walking up the stairs, and seeing her with him in our bed. That image was burned into my brain. It was something I could never unsee, something that would haunt me every time I looked at her. And that was what killed it. There was no way to erase that image, no way to scrub it from my memory. Sarah, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady, I don't think you understand. I can't forgive this. Even if I wanted to, I can't. She looked up, panic flashing across her face. No, Ben, please. I'll do anything. I'll leave my job, I'll never talk to him again. I'll do whatever it takes. I leaned forward, my voice sharp. And what, Sarah? You think quitting your job makes this better? That if you cut him off, somehow I'll forget what I saw, what you did? She didn't answer, just looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. And I knew that deep down, she didn't believe it either. She didn't believe that anything could fix this. But she wasn't ready to let go, wasn't ready to face the reality that our marriage, our life together, was over. For a long moment, we just sat there in silence. The room felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in on us. Every second that passed felt like a weight pressing down on me, like an endless reminder of what had happened, what she had destroyed. Finally, I spoke, my voice barely more than a whisper. Sarah, I can't stay here. Not with you. Not after this. She looked up, her face pale. What do you mean? I mean I'm leaving, I said, my voice steady but full of finality. I need to get out of here, away from you. I can't be here, can't look at you, can't. I just can't. She started to say something, then stopped, her face crumpling as the reality of my words hit her. Ben, please don't leave. I shook my head. I'm done, Sarah. There's nothing left to say. I stood up, grabbing my jacket and keys, and walked to the door. She got up, following me, desperation in her voice as she begged me to stay, to talk, to work things out. But I kept going, my mind made up, my heart too broken to consider any other option. I left the house, closing the door behind me without looking back. The night air was cold, but I barely felt it. I just stood there, staring at my car, trying to catch my breath, trying to process everything that had just happened. Then I got in the car, started the engine, and drove off, leaving the house, and her, behind. I spent that night at a cheap hotel on the edge of town, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My mind replayed everything over and over again, each memory, each betrayal like a fresh wound. I couldn't escape it, couldn't make it stop. I was trapped in my own thoughts, my own pain. The next morning, I called a lawyer. It felt strange, surreal, but I knew I had to do it. I needed to take control, to start figuring out what my life would look like now that Sarah was no longer a part of it. The lawyer listened, didn't ask too many questions, just gave me a rundown of what the next steps would be, what I could expect. I hung up, feeling a strange sense of relief. It was a small step, but it was something. It was a step toward a life without her, a life where I could maybe, eventually, put this all behind me. I went back to the house later that day, not to talk, not to argue, just to get a few things. She was there, of course, waiting, her face drawn and exhausted. She didn't say anything when I walked in, just watched as I moved through the house, grabbing a few clothes, some essentials, anything I'd need for the next few days. When I went to leave, she finally spoke, her voice quiet. "Ben, please, just talk to me. One last time." I stopped, looking at her. She was a mess, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. And for a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Why?" I asked, my voice flat. "What could you possibly say to me now?" She swallowed, looking down. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I am so sorry." I looked at her, feeling nothing but a hollow ache where my heart used to be. "I don't care if you're sorry, Sarah. It doesn't change anything." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't argue. She knew it was over, even if she couldn't bring herself to accept it. I turned and walked out, leaving her standing there, alone in the house we'd once shared, the life we'd once built. It was done. There was no going back. And as painful as it was, as broken as I felt, I knew it was the only choice I could make. It was strange, the way everything felt both painfully real and totally surreal at the same time. In the days that followed, I went through my routine almost on autopilot. I was staying in a short-term rental, a place with the bare minimum, a bed, a table, and a small kitchen. It was temporary, but that suited me just fine. It felt like everything in my life was temporary now, just a waiting game until I could figure out what the next permanent step would be. I didn't contact Sarah, and she didn't reach out to me, either. After that last encounter, I think we both understood it was over. I'd filed for divorce the morning after I left. The lawyer had gone through the process with me, and it was a relief to hear him lay out the steps, almost mechanically, as if he did this every day, which he probably did. He didn't waste time asking questions or trying to get a backstory. He only needed the basics, my name, Sarah's name, and the grounds for divorce. I told him the truth, infidelity. The hardest part, though, came a few days later, when I had to talk to my parents. I didn't want to tell them, I didn't want anyone to know. But I knew they'd find out eventually, and I wanted them to hear it from me, not from a rumor, not from Sarah trying to justify herself. So I called them, telling them I'd be over that evening to talk. When I walked into their house, I could feel their worry before I'd even opened my mouth. My mom had probably been imagining every worst-case scenario possible. She immediately asked if I was all right, and my dad stood there, his face a mask, waiting for me to explain. "I'm fine," I started, and I could hear the exhaustion in my own voice. "I'm getting by." They sat down on the couch, watching me carefully, and I took a seat across from them, trying to find the right words. "Sarah and I, we're getting a divorce." I said it as calmly as I could, keeping my tone even. My mom's eyes widened, and my dad's expression darkened. They looked at each other before looking back at me, waiting. So, I kept going. "I found out she was seeing someone else," I said simply, not wanting to go into more detail than I had to. "It's been going on for a while, apparently. I walked in on them. That's how I found out." I could see the shock and anger flash across their faces. They'd loved Sarah. She'd been part of our family for years, and this wasn't the kind of thing anyone expected from her. She'd seemed stable, committed, at least, that's what she'd wanted everyone to believe. My mom reached over, taking my hand. "Oh, Ben, I had no idea, we had no idea. I'm so sorry. I can't believe she would do this to you." I just nodded. I didn't need to say much. They understood. I didn't know what to do at first, I admitted. I thought about trying to make it work, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I'd never be able to forget what she did. It'd hang over everything, and that's no way to live. My dad finally spoke up, his voice gruff but full of concern. "You did the right thing, son. No one deserves that kind of betrayal, and you don't have to settle for it. You don't have to take it." Hearing that from him made it feel more real. My dad wasn't an emotional man, and he rarely gave advice, but when he did, it was always solid. If he believed I'd done the right thing, then maybe I could start to believe it too. They offered to let me stay with them, but I declined. I told them I needed time to myself, a place where I could clear my head without having to explain myself constantly. They understood, and my mom, though reluctant, agreed. She just told me to call if I ever needed anything, and I promised I would. After leaving my parents' place, I found myself thinking about what I wanted to do next. There was a big, empty question mark hanging over my life now. I couldn't go back, couldn't undo what had happened, and I wasn't sure what the future looked like. But I knew that I didn't want to live in that hotel room forever. It was time to start thinking about what came next, even if that thought filled me with a strange, empty dread. A week passed, then two. I went through the motions, dealing with paperwork, with dividing up the finances, with the logistics of untangling two lives that had been woven together for years. It was mind-numbing work, but it kept me busy, and right then, busy was good. I needed distractions, needed anything that kept me from sitting alone with my thoughts for too long. Then, one morning, I got a call from a mutual friend, Jeff. We hadn't talked much since everything had happened, though he'd reached out once or twice, mostly just to check in. I knew he was trying to respect my space, but today he seemed a little more insistent. "Hey, Ben. I know it's been a rough few weeks," he started, his voice cautious. "But I was wondering if you wanted to get together for a beer or something. Just get out, maybe talk things over." I hesitated. I hadn't been in the mood for socializing, hadn't been in the mood for much of anything. But Jeff had always been a good friend. He'd been there for me through a lot, and maybe I owed it to him to let him be there for me now too. "All right," I said finally. "Yeah, maybe a beer wouldn't be the worst idea." We met up that evening at a bar we used to go to, back when life was a lot simpler. When I walked in, Jeff was already there, waiting at a booth, 2 beers on the table. He greeted me with a nod, and I slid into the seat across from him, feeling a little like I was on autopilot. We talked about work for a while, about small things, and then Jeff leaned in, lowering his voice. "I heard. I mean, people have been talking, you know? About what happened. About Sarah." I nodded, not surprised. News like this didn't stay quiet for long, especially not in our circle. "I just want you to know," he said, his face serious, "everyone has your back. No one thinks she did the right thing, and no one blames you for doing what you had to do. You're not alone in this." It was strange, hearing that. I hadn't really thought about what other people were thinking, hadn't even considered that people might be taking sides. I'd been too wrapped up in my own head, in my own sense of betrayal and anger, to consider that maybe others felt the same way. "Thanks, Jeff," I said, meaning it. "I appreciate that." We talked for a while longer, about everything and nothing, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a little bit like myself again. It wasn't much, but it was something, a reminder that I had a life outside of what Sarah had done to me, that I had friends who cared, people who were still on my side. As the night wore on, Jeff finally broached the subject I knew was coming. "So, what's next? I mean, once the divorce is final, what do you think you'll do?" I thought about that for a long time, staring down into my beer. "I don't know," I admitted. "I haven't really thought that far ahead. Right now, it's just one day at a time, trying to get through each day without losing it." He nodded, understanding. Makes sense. But, when you're ready, there's a lot out there. Maybe even someone who won't betray you like that. I gave him a small, bitter smile. Right now, that's hard to imagine. But, maybe. Maybe someday. It wasn't much, but it was the first glimmer of hope I'd felt in a long time. I wasn't ready to start thinking about the future yet, wasn't ready to put myself out there. But the idea that there could be something better, something worth building toward, was enough to get me through the night. After we finished our drinks, I thanked Jeff and headed back to the rental, my mind a little clearer, my heart a little lighter. It was a small step, but it was something, and right now, that was all I could ask for. The road ahead was still dark, still full of uncertainty, but for the first time since this nightmare had started, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could find my way through it.